More breaking news. A judge handed down death sentences to Troy Victorino and Jerome Hunter, two men convicted in the 2004 brutal killings of 6 people in Deltona.
All of us who were here when that happened will never forget this case. WESH 2's Volusia County reporter Pamela Combe is outside the DeLand courthouse this afternoon with the latest.
After years of appeals, Troy Victorino and Jerome Hunter were sentenced to death today. It was a quick hearing, about 15 minutes long. The judge said she considered all the evidence and the jury's recommendation.
And after careful consideration, the court agrees with the jury's recommendation that
The courtroom was quiet as family members of the victims joined by Zoom. Investigators say Victorino and Hunter broke into a Deltona home in 2004 and killed 6 people and a dog. The jury first recommended death in 2006, but that sentence was overturned after changes in state law. A new sentencing later ended in a mistrial, and this year a new jury voted unanimously for death. The judge agreed and handed down the sentence on Monday. Victorino and Hunter will be moved to the Florida Department of Corrections and be held on death row until the sentence is carried out. They have 30 days to appeal, and the case will also get an automatic review by the state Supreme Court.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
It was an ordinary night in Deltona, Florida, until the violent echoes of a brutal crime shattered the stillness. A home invasion unlike any other. A massacre that would haunt this community for decades. 6 lives lost, a senseless act of violence. But what would drive 2 men to commit such a gruesome crime, over something as trivial as a missing Xbox? They weren't there for money. They weren't there for revenge in the usual sense. They came for an Xbox. And for a grudge that had been festering in Victorino's mind for weeks. They were bludgeoned, beaten with aluminum bats, stabbed again and again. The brutality of it stunned even seasoned detectives. They had no chance to scream, no time to run. All of this, over a game console. Over missing items that, in Victorino's mind, were his. And for that, 6 people paid with their lives. We thought it was a robbery gone wrong, but when we heard how many died, we couldn't even understand it. It just didn't make sense. Nothing about it did. 6 people. 1 dog. No survivors. And all the clues pointed toward a group of young men whose names no one had heard until that day. Troy Victorino was known to police. He had a violent temper, a history of arrests, and an ego easily bruised. When he believed someone had stolen from him, it became an obsession. Jerome Hunter was younger, impressionable, and easily led. The others followed out of fear, loyalty, or stupidity. It didn't matter. What mattered was what they did next. They planned it. They went back to the house. And they destroyed everything inside. The massacre on Telford Lane wasn't just another crime scene, it was the deadliest mass murder in Volusia County's history. It changed how people locked their doors, how they trusted their neighbors, how they slept at night. Deltona would never be the same. For the families, the nightmare didn't end when the police left, it was only the beginning. It's not just about murder. It's about betrayal, obsession, and the human cost of senseless violence. It's about a community that demanded justice, and a legal system that would take nearly 20 years to deliver. This is the story of the Xbox murders. The story of how rage, pride, and revenge took 6 innocent lives, and how, after decades of delays, the men responsible finally faced the ultimate judgment. It began as a simple argument over a missing game console, but by the time it ended, Deltona had become a name etched forever into the history of American crime. Jonathan Gleason, 17. Michelle Nathan, 19. Aaron Belanger, 22. Roberto Gonzalez, 28. Francisco A.O. Roman, 30. Anthony Vega, 34. And a dog, whose life was also taken in cold blood, 6 lives lost in an instant, and none of them deserved what came to them that night. These were not just names. These were people with families, dreams, and futures, and that night, all of that was ripped away in an instant. The house was a crime scene like no other. The victims were bludgeoned with baseball bats, stabbed repeatedly, and left for dead. A dog was beaten to death in the chaos. "We'd seen violent crimes before," one detective would later say. "But this was something else. Something we couldn't have prepared for. What makes a man do this? What makes someone walk into a home, baseball bat in hand, and murder 6 people over something as trivial as a stolen game console?" The pain of this loss would never fade. The families would have to live with the knowledge that their loved ones were taken so brutally, so senselessly, with no reason to explain it. The tragedy wasn't just the murders, it was the years that followed, years of unanswered questions, of waiting, of hoping for justice that seemed out of reach. But justice wouldn't come quickly, it would take years. Years of legal battles. Years of waiting for answers. Years of wondering, who could do something like this? And why? Victorino's childhood was a battleground. He learned early that survival meant fighting, whether with words, fists, or actions. He grew up on the streets, often angry, often alone. And when you grow up in that environment, when you learn to trust no one, you find ways to control what you can. Victorino's violent tendencies were not just something that appeared overnight, they were the result of years of feeling powerless, of being ignored by society. And when a man like that finds something, or someone, he feels he can control, he clings to it. He takes it too far. Hunter's story was one of neglect, not just physical but emotional. His mother was there, but she wasn't really there. And that left a void, a deep sense of abandonment. It was in that void that Hunter's own anger began to grow. Hunter didn't know how to process his emotions. He was a young man lost in his own pain, looking for a way to escape it. But the escape wasn't through healing, it was through destruction. Cannon was the kind of person who faded into the background. He wasn't the mastermind, but he wasn't innocent either. He was the follower, the one who went along with the group. But when the time came, he played his part in the bloodshed. Salas didn't have the same rage as Victorino or Hunter, but he still contributed. He still played a role. The violence didn't need to be personal for him, it was just a thing that happened. What made this group so dangerous was their collective lack of empathy. Each one brought something different to the table, but none of them had any sense of what was right or wrong. They were just a group of broken people who had come together, and together, they were capable of unimaginable things. They were not alone, but together, they were unstoppable. And that night, they unleashed a violence that would leave 6 people dead, a community shattered, and 4 men forever tied to one of the most brutal murders Deltona would ever know. It was just an ordinary evening, like any other, but by midnight, Deltona would be marked by a bloodshed it had never known before. They were ready, Troy Victorino, Jerome Hunter, Robert Cannon, and Michael Salas. Each had a part to play. Each knew what they had come for. There's a strange kind of calm before chaos. They had planned this night for weeks. But now that it was here, the air was thick with uncertainty, tension, and fear. Would this go as planned? Or would something go wrong? The house was quiet, the victims were unaware of what was coming. Inside, they were simply living their lives, as they had done every night before. But soon, the door would be kicked in, and everything would change. Troy Victorino kicked in the door, and in that instant, the world of these victims shattered. The storm had arrived. And then, the madness began. Blows were struck with such force that they shattered bones, ruptured organs, and ended lives before anyone could even think to scream. There was no mercy. These men didn't just want to take what was theirs. They wanted to destroy it. They wanted to exert control, to break something beyond repair. They did it not for money, but for power, for anger, and for vengeance. In the end, it wasn't the missing Xbox that mattered, it was the anger, the need for control, the utter disregard for human life that led them to commit this atrocity. 6 lives lost, all because of something so small, so petty. But for Victorino and Hunter, it was about something deeper, a desire to feel powerful in a world that had never given them power. They had no chance, the victims didn't know what was coming. They couldn't have known. And in the blink of an eye, their world was destroyed. Their futures were stolen. All because two men, fueled by rage and a warped sense of justice, decided that their anger would be unleashed in the most brutal way possible. And when the police arrived, it was too late. The damage was done. Lives were lost. And the nightmare for Deltona had just begun. The Xbox murders were more than just a crime. They were a wake-up call, a reminder that violence doesn't always have a clear reason. Sometimes, it's just chaos, waiting to break loose. The bodies were discovered early that morning. What happened in that house was so horrific, so beyond comprehension, that it sent shockwaves through the entire community. The question wasn't just who did it, but why, and how could anyone do something like this? Investigators scrambled to piece together the timeline of the murders. Every moment mattered. Every detail could unlock the mystery. But with so much chaos, so much destruction, finding answers seemed impossible. For the detectives, the case was overwhelming. They knew that finding the killers wouldn't be easy. But what they didn't know was just how long the road to justice would be. In the first days of the investigation, the police canvassed the neighborhood, speaking to witnesses, piecing together the events leading up to the massacre. But there were no immediate leads, no obvious suspects. The community, once tight-knit, was now gripped by fear. No one knew who could have done something so brutal to innocent people. As detectives combed through evidence, the scene revealed a chilling detail: there were no signs of forced entry into the house. The door had been kicked down, but the victims hadn't known their attackers. The lack of forced entry made it clear that the killer, or killers, knew the victims, but there was no way to know for sure. Every lead seemed to go cold. Hunter's denial didn't come as a surprise. He was scared. He was a young man, unaccustomed to the full weight of what he had just done. But deep down, he knew the truth. And eventually, that truth would come to light. The investigation seemed to stall, days turned into weeks, and still, there was no movement. But then, after days of questioning, something shifted. Hunter's confession. It was in the middle of a long, tense interrogation that Hunter finally cracked. Perhaps it was the exhaustion, or perhaps it was the guilt that had been eating away at him from the inside. Whatever the reason, Hunter finally admitted his involvement in the murders, and the floodgates opened. Under intense questioning, Hunter finally confessed to everything. He revealed the plan, the actions, the madness that had led them to that house. Hunter's confession was a turning point. It confirmed everything the detectives had suspected, but it also revealed something deeper. This wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. This was something more sinister, something personal, driven by rage and obsession. Troy Victorino was the driving force. He was the one who wanted revenge. He was the one who planned the attack. And once he had his mind set on it, nothing would stop him. They weren't just criminals, they were men who had lived through their own personal battles: Victorino's anger, Hunter's pain, the other's fear. These were the forces that had driven them to kill. But none of that would matter when they were finally brought to justice. With Hunter's confession and the mounting evidence, the authorities were able to piece together the final details of the crime. Troy Victorino, Jerome Hunter, Robert Cannon, and Michael Salas were all arrested and charged with the brutal murders of 6 people and the dog. The case that had once seemed impossible to solve was finally making progress. But even as the arrests were made and the charges filed, one question remained: how had it all come to this? The investigation may have led to arrests, but it didn't provide all the answers. It didn't explain the how or the why, only that a brutal act of violence had torn through a community and forever changed the lives of everyone involved. Victorino and Hunter were convicted of multiple crimes, including murder, armed burglary, and cruelty to animals, but the road to justice was far from over. For the victims, for their families, and even for the perpetrators, the journey was just beginning. It was painful to hear the families speak of their loved ones. The people who died that night were not just names, they were children, siblings, parents. They were loved. In 2018, a major shift occurred. Florida's death penalty law was challenged, throwing the original death sentence into turmoil. A ruling made it clear that a unanimous jury was now required to recommend the death penalty, something that had not been needed when Victorino and Hunter had been sentenced. This was a setback. A decade after the crime, after years of hearings, the families were now facing even more delays. Justice seemed to slip further away, as the law turned and twisted, leaving them in limbo once again. For more than 10 years, the families waited for justice, but now, in 2023, the trial will finally continue. And this time, the men's fate would be decided not by unanimous consent, but by a majority. The defense wanted to paint a picture of two men who had been shaped by trauma, by a life of neglect and anger, but for the victims' families, this was not about understanding why these men had done what they did. It was about holding them accountable for their actions. It was about seeking justice. The prosecution's case was simple. This wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. This was murder, cold and deliberate. And they had to pay for it. Every one of them spoke of loss, but their words were not just about grief. They spoke of justice. Of accountability. Of what their loved ones had lost, and what they had given up. My son, he says, he was just starting out in life. He had a future. But they took that away. And now, we're here to make sure they never get to do that again. After more than a decade of delays, the moment had come. The jury had spoken. And they had recommended the death penalty. In the end, Troy Victorino and Jeroen Hunter would pay the price for their actions, but no verdict, no sentence, can ever bring back the lives they took. It is a bitter truth that haunts us all. Justice may be served, but the cost is always too high. The families had waited for this moment. They had waited through decades of appeals, legal maneuvering, and court delays. And on May 15, 2023, the moment had arrived. Judge Nichols delivered the sentence. Troy Victorino and Jeroen Hunter would die for their actions. The sentence was final. But relief, as it turned out, was not as simple as it seemed. The true cost of the crime isn't just in the death of these 6 people. It's grief. The lingering scars that can never be healed. He never had a chance, the father says. He never got to live the life he was meant to have. He never got to become the man he could have been. All because of one night. One senseless act of violence. She was my only child, she says. She was full of life. She was going to be something amazing. And now, she's gone. This won't bring her back. Nothing will. But it's something. It's justice. And that's all we can ask for. For Troy Victorino and Jeroen Hunter, the sentence meant nothing but another step in the long, drawn-out process that had been their lives for the past 2 decades. But for the families of the victims, this was the end of a long road, a road that had been paved with unimaginable grief and loss. There are no winners in cases like this. There is no true justice. There is no way to erase the pain. But there is a sense of finality. A sense that, perhaps, in some small way, these families have received the closure they deserved. The pain never goes away, one father says quietly, but maybe, just maybe, with this sentence, we can start to heal. Maybe we can start to move forward. Even if it's just a little. Justice, in the end, is a complicated thing. It doesn't bring back the dead. It doesn't fix the broken lives. But it does offer something that allows the families to move forward, to at least try to heal. The final sentence was not just a legal decision. It was a moment of closure, though that closure was bittersweet. The families of the victims may never fully heal, but at least they could begin to move forward. The long road to justice had come to an end, but the scars would remain, forever. And in the end, it's not about the verdict, it's about what comes after. It's about the lives that were lost, and the lives that must go on. Deltona, a city forever marked by the events of that night. A community haunted by the brutality that changed it forever. For the residents of Deltona, that night was the moment their small, quiet world collided with horror. And like any community scarred by violence, Deltona would never be the same again. It's hard to describe, one local resident says, we always thought of Deltona as a safe place. A small town. You never think something like this could happen here. It changed everything. People were scared to go out, to trust their neighbors. It felt like we lost a part of ourselves. After it happened, things felt different, he recalls, we started locking our doors more often, looking over our shoulders. The community just shifted. You could feel the fear. People started talking more about violence, about crime. It was like we all lost a bit of our innocence that night. This was unlike anything we had seen before, a former detective on the case recalls, the brutality of the crime. It was shocking. We've worked on homicides before, but nothing prepared us for this. The way the victims were treated, the senseless violence, it was unlike anything I had ever encountered. It changed the way we operated, he says, we had to change how we approached violent crime. We had to be more vigilant, more prepared. This case set a new standard for us in terms of how we looked at threats in the community. And it made us realize that even in the safest neighborhoods, anything can happen. While the death sentence brings some sense of closure, it also raises questions. Was justice truly served? What price are we willing to pay for revenge? And in the end, who really wins when violence begets violence? There's a part of us that wants the killers to suffer, to feel the weight of their actions, she says, but does executing them really bring justice? Does it make the pain go away? For the families of the victims, it might. But for the rest of us, it leaves us asking, what does it mean to be truly just? The problem with justice is that it's never really final. Even when a sentence is delivered, there's always the question of what's been lost. A life taken can never be returned. A future stolen can never be replaced. No matter the outcome, the consequences of their actions will ripple through the community forever. We've tried to move forward, says another local resident, but there's a part of the town that will always carry that darkness. It's like a scar we can't see, but we feel it every day. You can never forget something like this. The pain doesn't just go away, but as time passes, the community tries to heal. The families of the victims may never fully recover, but they carry their loved ones' memories with them. And in that, there is a kind of strength. The question of justice is always complicated, but in the end, it's not just about what happens in the courtroom. It's about what happens afterward. It's about the lives that continue and the legacies that are left behind. The story of the Xbox murders is a tragic reminder of how a single act of violence can ripple through a community, changing lives forever. It's a story about loss, grief, and the never-ending search for justice. But it is also a story about the brokenness that comes with the aftermath of such senseless violence. Is it truly justice when a life is taken in return? Or is there another way? And what does it mean for a community to heal, when so much is lost, and so much is broken? It's not enough. Nothing will ever be enough. My daughter is gone. But I wanted them to know, what they did, it's not just about them. It's about all of us. What happens when a community is shattered? How do you rebuild when the very foundation of trust and safety is torn apart by violence? Would justice truly make a difference? Or has it all been too far gone to fix? Justice doesn't erase the pain, one father says, standing by his son's memorial. It doesn't fix what's broken. But it's something. It's something we can hold on to, even if it's not enough. What happens when justice has been served, but the pain remains? What happens when the community is left to rebuild, knowing that it can never go back to what it once was? Thank you for watching this story of tragedy, justice, and the long, winding road to closure. The events we've covered, though they've reached their legal conclusion, leave behind questions about justice, about morality, and about how a community can ever truly heal after such loss. In the end, the road to closure is never simple. The death sentence, the conviction, the long years of waiting for justice, these were milestones along the way. But the true toll of the crime lies in what it took from the families, and what it left behind. Was it justice? What does it mean for a community to heal when it is broken by such senseless violence? Can there ever be true closure, or is it something we only hope for, knowing it will always remain just out of reach? The Xbox murders were not just about the murderers who committed the crime. They were about the people whose lives were affected, those who lost everything in the blink of an eye. The families of the victims, the town of Deltona, and the very system of justice that struggled to keep up with the toll this case took. If you want to learn more about this case, or explore similar stories, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below. Is it truly justice when a life is taken in return? Or is there another way? What does it mean for a community to heal, when so much is lost, and so much is broken? The search for answers is never truly over. And for those who lost so much, the path to healing is one they must walk alone, no matter how long the road. This has been the story of the Xbox murders. A tale of loss, a tale of justice, and a reflection on the cost of violence. Thank you for watching.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.